Hello and a very warm welcome to everybody joining us for another installment of Inside SA Media, brought to you by Tribox Media and Factford, and my name is Lungiswenya Kyowa on a chair. Absolutely excited for today's episode because we're talking one of my favorite forms of media. We're talking about the voices of the people. We're talking about community media. Let's get into it. In a world that's dominated by big broadcasters and global platforms, what actually happens to the voices at the margins? In South Africa, it's community media that fills that gap. I'm talking from township frequencies to rural broadcasts. These stations aren't just transmitters. These can sometimes be lifelines. This is the story of community radio and TV. This is a story about media by the people and media for the people. Community media is not commercial. It's not state-run. It's actually run by communities, by volunteers, by NGOs, and of course cooperatives. In South Africa, we have over 200 licensed community stations and several community TV platforms like Cape Town TV, Soweto TV, and Bay TV. And of course, those names tell you exactly where they're located. Broadcasting in local languages, these platforms promote local culture. They highlight issues that you find that maybe in a lot of mainstream medias, these issues are not focused on or are not covered a lot or even sometimes completely ignored. And they also create the space for public participation. So this sector emerged in the early 1990s alongside democracy. The Independent Broadcasting Authority, or IBA, which later became ICASA, opened the airwaves to communities. Projects like Bush Radio in Cape Town were pioneers, first broadcasting illegally and then licensed post-1994. It's such an interesting story, we have to talk about it. So in the early 1990s, apartheid was crumbling, but the media was still tightly controlled. That's when a group of activists in Cape Town did something radical. On the 25th of April in 1993, they switched on a homemade transmitter and started broadcasting illegally. It was the first voice of Bush Radio. And of course, it didn't last very long because I'm telling you, police raided that studio, they confiscated equipment and arrested the people who organized it. But just days later, they were back on air, this time on May Day. They were broadcasting protest songs, local stories, political discussions, and I think there was a clear message that was being sent to the state there. And that message was, we will not be silent. Bush Radio had its roots in the Cassette Education Foundation, which was an underground movement that was distributing anti-apartheid audio recordings. Their private broadcast was the next evolution in resistance. This defiance really sparked national debate, and eventually they actually helped found the National Community Radio Forum, which actually shaped the country's post-apartheid broadcasting laws. In 1995, Bush Radio was finally granted a license, and then this made them one of the first legally recognized community radio stations in Africa. Since then, Bush Radio has trained hundreds of broadcasters. It has served countless communities, and it's become a powerful hub for health, education, social upliftment, and of course cultural celebration. They started out as outlaws, or well, they were considered at the time, based on the state of the nation, as outlaws. But today, Bush Radio is a living monument to power of people-powered media. The thing about community radio is that it speaks in isiZulu, it speaks in isiTswana, in Xitsonga, and so much more. It's the only form of media that many rural residents trust and understand fully. It plays local music. It talks about things that are relevant to communities. It addresses farm worker rights. It talks about community-centered issues. It even hosts community leaders, really keeping the community at the center of what is being discussed on the airwaves. I think in essence it's really a mirror of identity and a platform for preserving culture. But while the reach is wide, resources are thin. Community stations rely a lot on advertising, small grants, and sometimes even staff funding. So some stations have actually gone dark. Others have been hijacked before by political factions, or others we've read about how they've been mismanaged into oblivion. Take, for example, Cape Town TV, which nearly closed in 2009, and the story of Radio Grahamstown, which had to fight to stay on air despite severe funding gaps. So when we talk about it, we have to remember that without training, without legal support, or sustainable models, these vital institutions are always at risk. So let's start with the story of Cape Town TV and get into it a little bit. So in October 2009, Cape Town TV, which is obviously better known as CTV, suddenly went off air. Not because of some scandal or censorship or some kind of sabotage, no. They went off air because they just could not afford to stay on air. The station owed Centec, the national signal distributor, over 150,000 Rand in transmission fees. And without that payment, their signal was cut. CTV was facing a shutdown and they needed over 600,000 just to survive. This was more than some technical hiccup. CTV was serving over 600,000 daily viewers. Many of them had no other access to alternative, locally produced content. CTV was also not receiving any of the commercial support or public funding that was keeping larger broadcasters afloat. They were, like many other community stations, basically operating on passion and fumes. But CTV didn't go quietly, okay? Staff and supporters marched to Parliament in November 2009, demanding that, these transmission fees be lowered for non-profit broadcasters. They also wanted access to public funding, and of course they wanted a guaranteed frequency allocation in the digital migration process. Their persistence did pay off because ICASA stepped in and reduced the transmission costs significantly. So these went from 70,000, I think around 70,000, to roughly 40,000 Rand per month. CTV then came back on air and their message was clear. Community media might be underfunded, but it will never be silenced. By 2014, CTV had now partnered with DSTV and was reaching over 2.5 million people every single month. In 2019 and 2020, they launched a production development program. This was to train grassroots producers across the Cape Flats. And thanks to the support from partners like MultiChoice and Viacom, this became a possibility. CTV's journey is one of those things that we look at as proof that even in those challenging media economies, local voices are able to do something, right? Because if the people behind them refuse to back down and keep pushing forward, nothing can hold those doors closed. And now on to the story of Radio Grahamstown. This one I also love because it's also one of those really good examples about how a small station or a small platform can rise from the ashes. In a small city in the Eastern Cape, Radio Grahamstown was born from a dream that ordinary people, not just media elites, should be able to tell their own stories in their own language to their own community. It all began in 1991 with no studio, no staff, and no equipment. Volunteers worked through Rhodes Music Radio until they got their first temporary license in 1995. And in 1999, with the support from the Open Society Foundation, the station opened a full-time studio. But like many other community stations, success was not permanent. Radio Grahamstown then lost its license in the early 2000s. This was because of internal board instabilities and chronic funding shortfalls. It seemed like the station was gone for good. But the people of Grahamstown were not ready to let it go. A new task team restructured the board, stabilized the organization, and successfully applied for a new license in 2008. With the help from Graatsmail and the Knight Foundation, the station secured a permanent home rent-free, and resumed broadcasting. Despite being licensed to broadcast 24 hours, financial limitations meant they aired from 6 a.m. to about midnight. Still, community trust and listenership grew steadily, reaching around 50,000. The story of Radio Grahamstown is one that really speaks of local resilience, because when those airwaves went silent, it was the people who rallied to turn it back on. When COVID hit, it was community media that was translating health advice. When elections approach, it's community talk shows that explain voter registrations in local languages like Xitsonga and isiNdebele. It's also where young talent gets trained. Some of the country's top journalists started behind humble community microphones. And even now, in the age of misinformation, these are the platforms that provide trusted local context. Community media is not charity, it's democracy in action. To keep it alive, we must fund it, we must train it, but importantly, we have to protect it. Because if communities lose their voice, who will tell their stories? Thank you so very much for tuning in and staying with us as we talk through a very important part of SA media, which is community media. We really hope that you enjoyed it and learned something. Please do join us for our next episode, and we look forward to having you there. Please go ahead and engage with us in the comment section. Tell us what you thought about the content. Tell us what you'd like to see more of on the platform. We'd love to hear and engage with you further. From myself, Lingusunga on a chair, it is goodbye.